Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second OSEP National Technical Assistance Call in June. Please note that next month we will not have any national TA calls. We will be back on schedule Thursday, August 10th. I'd also like to take time to thank all of you who have completed the grantee satisfaction survey. We take that feedback very seriously to make improvements to our work and look forward to receiving those responses from the department in the coming weeks if you have not submitted it yet. The OSEP 2023 Combined Leadership Project Directors Conference is around the corner on July 24th through the 26th at the Crystal Gateway Marriott Hotel in Arlington, Virginia. We look forward to seeing you. Unfortunately, during this conference, we will not be able to stream or record any of the content. So we strongly encourage your in-person participation and want to remind you that travel to the conference is permissible use of IDA funds. If you are a Part C attendee, hopefully you have already received and reviewed your SPP APR determination through the EMAP system. If you have not, they were released yesterday, so please check emails. The data implementation team is working around the clock to ensure that we issue the Part B SPP APR determinations on time as well. So please be on the lookout for those if you are a Part B attendee. We will also post how the department made determinations and the SPP APR determinations fact sheets in the coming days on our website. So please look for those documents. Each state's SPP APR letter and the associated Word file will be posted later this summer, and we will provide notification when they are available. We are also in the midst of preparing grants. The program implementation team is working feverishly to get those grant awards out timely on July 1st. The DMS implementation team continues to work to prepare states for engagement activities, and we will have a team on site in Montana next week. I want to publicly acknowledge and thank the Data IT, Program IT, and DMS IT for all their hard work to ensure that we carry out all of these important activities, especially when they collide at this time of year. Now I'd like to take a minute to introduce our panel from the Office of Educational Technology for our feature presentation. First, I'd like to introduce Ji-Soo Song, Digital Equity Advisor, Jessica Chong, Educational Pioneers Fellow, and Ellery Robinson, also an Education Pioneers Fellow. I will turn it over to our panel for the presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting us to speak today. We're really excited to chat with you all. So my name is Jessica Chung. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a fellow at the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Educational Technology. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Ji-Soo Song and Ellery Robinson. I'm going to pass the mic to them for their introductions as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ji-Soo Song, serving as a digital equity advisor for the Office of Educational Technology, where my role is to collaborate with agencies and offices across the federal government to help maximize the impact of various programs, policies surrounding digital equity and inclusion for our students, educators, and communities. We're really excited to be here to talk to you about some of our digital equity work and how you can get involved in all of that. So yeah, thank you for making time this afternoon. I'll pass it to Ellery.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ellery Robinson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an Education Pioneers Impact Fellow in the Office of Educational Technology. As a previous special ed teacher and a parent advocate, I support the team around accessibility. So I'm really excited to share about some of the accessibility work that the Office of Ed Tech and the Department of Education have been working on. And I'll pass it back to Jessica.
So thank you so much. So first, for those of you who are unfamiliar with our office, the Office of Educational Technology establishes the vision for how technology can be used to transform teaching and learning. We're most known for issuing the National Educational Technology Plan, or the NETP, on a regular basis, which often becomes the foundation for local and state educational technology plans. The 2017 NETP is currently undergoing a refresh with a goal of publishing it by early 2024. So stay tuned for that. And as for today's presentation, we'd like to talk to you all about state digital equity planning processes. We'll provide some of the policy context around those processes that are underway in every state. We'll review some of the findings from our Advancing Digital Equity for All guidance, which discusses community-based strategies for helping learners access digital opportunities. We'll highlight examples of the role that leaders can play in advocating for digital equity, especially within the context of state digital equity plans. And we'll also share resources and key steps for local leaders, local and state education leaders to get involved in digital equity efforts. We'll then take a bit of a break for questions. So if you have questions while we're presenting, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A box. And then we will pass the mic to Ellery to share some updates on the work that OET is doing centering accessibility. So it'll be a presentation in a couple parts, but we're really excited to answer your questions and hear from you all. So we ultimately hope that this presentation helps you consider how you can contribute to state digital equity plans and digital equity efforts at the local, state, and national levels, and ensure that the needs and assets of the education sector are addressed in these digital equity plans and digital equity efforts. So first, to provide some policy context, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which passed in fall 2021, includes $65 billion in broadband investments. And we have an opportunity through this funding to make home access to broadband and digital opportunities equitably and sustainably available at scale. This funding includes the Digital Equity Act programs, which are administered by the Department of Commerce, specifically the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, otherwise known as NTIA. And the Digital Equity Act programs includes funds for the development of state digital equity plans. So I should first sort of clarify and underline that this funding is not flowing through the Department of Education, but we want to make sure that the education sector is included and involved in these planning processes. So all states and territories, all states and several territories have already received their digital equity planning funds. Many of them received those funds in November or December, and they each have a year from the date they receive their planning funds to complete their plans. So for many states, their planning processes are well underway, and we'll discuss that more over the course of the presentation. As for what the digital equity plans are required to include, the grants require them to include items like the identification of barriers, measurable objectives, an assessment of how these objectives will impact and interact with other factors like economic and workforce development, educational outcomes, health outcomes, civic and social engagement, and the delivery of other essential services. NTIA also requires states to consider the needs of covered populations, which are listed on the slide. So those include individuals who live in covered households. So those are households where the income is not more than 150% of the poverty level. That includes aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, veterans, individuals with disabilities, individuals with a language barrier, individuals who are a member of a racial or ethnic minority group, and individuals residing in a rural area. So as you can see, learners are not included in the list of covered populations. However, learners and their families and caregivers overlap with every covered population listed, including individuals with disabilities, and therefore our office sees a necessity for state digital equity plans to address the needs and assets of the education sector in order to close the digital divide and meet the needs of these covered populations. So with this background in mind, and knowing, as I had mentioned, that the Department of Education is not the lead federal agency on the Digital Equity Act programs, some of the central questions we've asked ourselves are, what is the Department of Education's role in maximizing the impact of that $65 billion investment in broadband access in the bipartisan infrastructure law, especially as state leaders are developing plans for spending these dollars? And how can we increase access for learners, families, educators, and communities that are the furthest from digital opportunities? And we urge you all to consider, what role can you play in ensuring that state digital equity plans address the needs and assets of the education sector, especially those of the special education programs community and individuals with disabilities. So to support state broadband and education leaders with their digital equity planning and ensure the benefits of these historic investments reach learner communities, we launched the Digital Equity Education Roundtables initiative last fall, otherwise known as the DEAR initiative. And this initiative aimed to identify barriers to broadband and technology access for learners and to suggest promising strategies for leaders as they develop those state digital equity plans. The initiative particularly focused on learner communities furthest from digital opportunities, such as learners of color, Indigenous learners, learners in rural areas, learners in digitally redlined urban areas, and learners with disabilities. And so as a culmination of the roundtables that we held, we published a resource called Advancing Digital Equity for All, and we're really excited to be able to share this resource for you. This resource is available at tech.ed.gov/DEER, and you can also scan the QR code on the slide to access the resource. And in developing the resource, we found through our scan of the literature on digital equity in education and through our listening sessions that access is comprised of three critical elements. We call them the 3 A's of availability, affordability, and adoption. And this is the framework that organizes the resource as well. So we argue that for equitable access to happen, we need to ensure that all 3 aspects of access are addressed. We need to address availability, ensuring that the physical infrastructure is in place to enable access to broadband and technology tools in a given area. We need to also address affordability and consider families' ability to pay for the total cost of maintaining access to broadband and technology tools for learning. And we also need to address adoption. We need to think about those human level barriers that can either, those human level factors that can either enable or impede access in some communities, such as access to information, technical support, digital skills and literacy building opportunities. We also need to think about public trust and relationships that can support people in accessing broadband services and technology tools for learning. So while our federal colleagues at the Federal Communications Commission and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration tackle issues of broadband availability and affordability, we saw an opportunity for the Department of Education to really drive the conversation around adoption, emphasizing the needs and assets of the education sector and taking a human approach to digital equity. So given their experiences navigating the pandemic, we know that education leaders have invaluable experience in supporting the adoption of technology tools for learning. Education communities have developed and implemented adoption strategies such as co-creating solutions with communities, providing inclusive and accessible technical support, building digital literacy skills and digital resilience. Schools and education institutions are also trusted members of their communities and can help meet people where they are and leverage trusted community assets such as digital navigators who are from communities and able to provide support to communities. Schools and education institutions also have a lot of experience with collecting data and feedback and can support regular learning and feedback cycles on digital inclusion efforts to figure out what's working and should be scaled, as well as what's not working and needs to be modified. And so we know from the DEAR initiative as well that learners with disabilities experience unique barriers to accessing technology-empowered opportunities, such as outdated or inadequate equipment, inaccessible online platforms and course materials, a lack of access to assistive technology and in-person support. We also know that the most impactful solutions are those that are co-designed with learners and built to be accessible. So we must ensure that learners with disabilities and their families, caregivers, educators, and organizations are included in conversations around digital equity to help identify barriers and also propose solutions, because they are the experts in what those experiences are. And so we at the Office of Educational Technology have also been collecting and sharing examples of education institutions, communities, and organizations implementing strategies implementing strategies that address some of these adoption issues. Two of our recent stories feature Ava's Voice and the ARC, two organizations that support learners with disabilities. And we have more stories to come that we're excited to continue sharing with the field. And so with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Jisoo.
Thanks so much, Jessica. I know this is a lot of information, so if folks have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, and we'll get to them in just a bit. And we're going to be sharing a lot of links in this section, so we'll also make sure to share the slides through our OSEP colleagues after the webinar. After hearing from Jessica, I think the bottom line question that's popping up in your heads right now is, how can education leaders like yourselves contribute to the ongoing digital equity efforts nationwide? So I want to share a couple of things that are suggested from our office. First, at the local level, as trusted hubs of information, we know that schools and districts can help promote the Affordable Connectivity Program. You might already know that the Affordable Connectivity Program, or the ACP, provides qualifying households with a discount of $30 per month to help pay internet bills, and up to $75 per month for those on qualifying tribal land. So please continue sharing information about the ACP with your schools and school districts, educators, learners, families, caregivers, and communities, so that eligible households can take advantage of this benefit. We know 48 million households across the United States can take advantage of the ACP, and as of today, around 19 million have done so far, so that we know many more households can take advantage of this program. And if you go to tech.ed.gov/ACP, you'll see our outreach toolkit that can help share information through eligible households. We've also recently partnered with the White House and Civic Nation on a campaign called Online for All to promote broadband access, affordability, and equity. And you can find that information about this Online for All campaign and the ways that you all can contribute to this national effort at onlineforall.org. There's some great outreach resources around the ACP on this page. Over the past week, we engaged in a National Week of Action, and we were able to mobilize more than 300 organizations on the ground that committed to helping communities get enrolled. But it's not too late to join the cause, so please help us share information about the ACP with students and families by checking out, again, tech.ed.gov/ACP. or onlineforall.org. So coming back to the topic of digital equity plans, I know I took a little bit of a detour with the ACP, but coming back to that topic, first, we encourage you to reflect on the barriers and strategies that are included in the guidance resource, Advancing Digital Equity for All, that Jessica talked about. How do those barriers and strategies resonate with your own communities? Are there barriers in our guidance that you've also observed in your own communities? And are these strategies that we've heard from those that we convened also those that you found to be promising? Second, we encourage you to keep up to speed on stakeholder engagement efforts that are announced by your state's broadband office and share that information with leaders that you work with in the education sector. A lot of states that we've been talking to have been holding, statewide listening tours, which might visit your local area. And you can see our blog for a list of links where states have announced or will soon announce their engagement efforts. And if you haven't done so already, we encourage you to check with your points of contact, at the state level, at the SEA level, to see if they've successfully grabbed a seat at the digital equity planning table. Discuss how you can best support their efforts if they're already underway. And also consider how education can enhance the sustainability of the digital equity efforts that are launched by your state's broadband office. And you can refer to our office's 2023 Dear COG letter to find out how to leverage federal funding for teaching and learning with technology, and think about how those objectives can be shared with those of your state's broadband office. Number 5, we encourage you to find out, if you haven't done so already, who your state's federal programs officer is and the state broadband office contact are, and by looking at the Internet for All map, internetforall.gov/interactive map, and consider reaching out to them and offering your support and expertise. If you go on that map link, for each state, there are 2 key links provided by key contacts provided by NTIA. Every state has a federal programs officer from NTIA, as well as a central state broadband officer that is on the page. So consider reaching out to them and offering your support. Number 6, state broadband offices and NTIA FPOs, they're a really good point of contact to learn more about how you can contribute. And in reaching out to them, carefully consider things like, what's the specific value that your input could provide? For example, how could you serve as an asset in the state digital equity planner's ongoing efforts to compile relevant data about what's needed to promote digital inclusion in your state? How to best engage with covered populations, including individuals with disabilities? How to identify promising practices that work with specific covered populations, and eventually, partner with them in implementing those strategies that become included in the digital equity plans. And then lastly, digital equity plans are required by law to undergo a 30-day public comment period. So when your state announces them, consider participating or sharing that notice with local leaders that you work with to further advocate for the needs of learners furthest from opportunities. We know that states like Utah, Louisiana, and Maine, and Montana, I think, have already announced their comment periods. So we know that over the summer, states will begin their public comment periods on a rolling basis. So when they're announced, please share that information with the leaders in the education sector that you work with. So here's a resources page. Again, we'll share the slides through our OSEP colleagues in case you missed any of these. And next slide, please. So in conclusion of the digital equity section of our presentation, we return to the key question that Jessica asked earlier in this presentation. What role could you play as leaders in the education sector to ensure that our state digital equity plans engage with the needs and the assets of the education sector? And how could the Office of Educational Technology support you in this work? How can we help build a bridge to those state digital equity planners? Well, so we're happy to take questions, and we look forward to collaborating with you all to advance digital equity for all. Before Ellery shared some of our other work that OET is doing regarding EdTech accessibility, we'd love to, again, take your questions. So if you have any, please feel free to post them in the Q&A function. So we'll take maybe a minute pause in case folks are typing. Yeah, feel free to drop in any questions around your state's digital equity planning efforts, around the Online for All campaign, the Affordable Connectivity Program. We'd love to make sure that leaders in this space are involved with all of those national efforts, because you know about the needs that our students face on an everyday basis. We'll take about 30 more seconds in case folks have questions. And if you do have questions that pop up for you later, we'll get to them at the end. About 15 more seconds in case folks have any questions. Again, if you think of any questions later down the road, feel free to still drop them in and we'll get to them at the end. I do not see any currently, so Ellery, I will pass it off to you for the time being.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Ellery, and like Jisoo said, if you have questions from about what I'm about to share or about digital equity initiatives, please feel free to put them in the chat. And so as Jisoo and Jessica have been discussing, digital equity is critical for learners to engage with their education. And one particularly important population is our learners with disabilities, as you all know. So thinking about it in the three access components mentioned by Jessica earlier, equitable access looks like the following for learners with disabilities. There's availability. Many learners with disabilities require technology to learn, communicate, and engage with the world around them. For example, a learner may require a communication device at all times to engage with their teachers, their family, and their friends. We need to think about how can we ensure that learners with disabilities have access to broadband and devices that they require to learn and communicate. Second is affordability. Accessibility has to be a component to consider when procuring technology and devices for learners to be able to use both at school and at home. And thinking more about affordability, how can we ensure communications such as about the Affordable Connectivity Program are accessible so that families with individuals with disabilities can access and use these benefits? How can you connect learners to affordable broadband and accessible technology in school and at home? And lastly, there's adoption. As we know, having the right technology and devices is not enough. There needs to be a structure in place for ensuring all team members understand how to use the technology. So how can you train learners, educators, and families to use and implement the accessible technologies? Next slide. Thank you. So before I share some of the resources that the Department of Education has been working on, I want to make sure we all have the same definition of accessibility in mind, as defined by the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education, and referenced by the organization CAST. Accessibility is when a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability, in an equally effective and equally integrated manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. So technology is a bridge to increase access for all learners, but if it's not integrated correctly, technology can increase barriers for learners with disabilities. As technology becomes a larger component in everyday life and learning, it's increasingly important that all technology is accessible for all learners. In order for learners to meaningfully participate in their education, all learners must be able to access and engage with their educational materials. So really thinking about digital accessibility is allowing for learners with disabilities to meet the same outcomes as learners without disabilities. So how can state leaders improve their accessibility initiatives and cultures and educational communities? You all have valuable roles as leaders in your states and communities. How can you ensure that the people that you work with and the people that you lead understand and implement accessibility in their work? When communication and technology is inaccessible, It fails to meet all learners, educators, staff, and families. So here are some small changes you can make to support your communities. The first is to disseminate the Office for Civil Rights Digital Accessibility video series to your staff. These really brief video clips discuss the importance of digital accessibility and give brief instructions into how to get started. I know that one state department has used these videos as trainings for their staff and educators by sharing them out and having pre and post quizzes. And we will be sharing all of the links, and this one is at adata.org/OCR videos. Next is to connect your educators with your state's Assistive Technology Center. Through the Assistive Technology Act, states receive funding to provide technical assistance to educators across their state. Through these centers, IEP team members, including parents, can receive support from a specialist for free to discuss and learn about various devices that may work for a specific student, request a demonstration of any device, borrow a device for a short period of time, and learn about how to purchase the device through the school or financing and loan options. And this is at the at3center.net website. And that's an incredibly valuable resource for educators to implement with their students, because there's so much out there that can support their learners and achieve their student outcomes. Next, you can partner with CAS's National Center on Accessible Educational Materials for Learning, also known as the AIM Center, to receive technical assistance on the procurement, implementation, and use of accessible educational materials. The AIM Center provides 3 different levels of technical assistance, starting at universal technical assistance, which is available to everyone. Their products, services, webinars, and resources are free throughout their website and on their resources and events pages. The next level is targeted technical assistance, which includes strategic collaborations to address problems of practice in early childhood programs, higher education, and workforce development. And lastly, the AIM Center has intensive technical assistance, which is capacity building activities with states. And this partnership is designed to produce practices that can be scaled nationally. And you can find more about the AIM Center at aim.cas.org. Lastly, you can disseminate the EdTech for All webinar series to your educators. The Office of EdTech has partnered with the Office of Special Ed Programs to host the EdTech for All webinar series. After OET hosted many listening sessions with educators, we learned that one of the most common concerns was their lack of knowledge and time to know of available evidence-based low-cost tools that they could implement in their classroom. And they were feeling incredibly overwhelmed with trying to find and use these tools. So this webinar series was made to equip educators and school leaders with evidence-based EdTech tools to implement with those students who have or do not have disabilities, with the goal of improving student outcomes. We have the first 2 up on our website with the tools We Go Right and Corgi, and there'll be more to come, and you'll be able to register on our website, tech.ed.gov/accessibility. And lastly, while it's important to share resources and trainings with your educators and staff, it is critical for these changes to be happening at the statewide level. The Office of EdTech has resources on how to make those changes in your culture and your initiatives. First off, Office of EdTech is partnering with Office of Special Education Rehabilitative Services, or OSERS, to share free federal resources on accessibility for state and local education leaders. We have curated free resources that are made for educational leaders to adjust their digital content, such as communications out to staff and families, surveys sent out, and creating digital documents in order for them to be accessible for all and not just for some. Resources also include how to leverage funding to support technology and accessibility in schools through the Office of EdTech's Dear Colleague letter, as well as how to implement accessible policies and how to support staff with disabilities and their accommodations. Next, OET is also partnering with OSERS and the South Carolina Department of Education to highlight how state departments can develop accessibility, inclusive culture, and accessibility initiatives. Previously, the South Carolina Department of Education was tapped on the shoulder by the Department of Ed for inaccessible websites. But since then, they've made a complete 180 and have transformed their State Department of Education to include accessibility throughout. They started with their culture within the department, including policies and digital accessibility of communication. They then are also supporting their districts by completing reviews of district websites to ensure accessibility. And lastly, South Carolina is providing accessibility trainings to their educators, including using WebAIM trainings. They're doing summer boot camps before school starts up and professional development throughout the year on how to create accessible content. So please consider watching the Implementing Accessibility Learning from the South Carolina Department of Education webinar, which can give you a firsthand experience of how a state department of education went from kind of the bottom and created a small team to focus on accessibility issues within their department, for their districts, and for their educators, which the recording of the webinar can be found on tech.ed.gov/accessibility. Lastly, the Office of EdTech is partnering with OSEP to develop policy guidance for state and local education leaders specifically on assistive technology processes, funding, implementation, and evaluation. This will be coming out later on, so look out for guidance around assistive technology, especially those funding sources that you can tap into. And so those are some of the ways you can increase your accessibility within your department and your communities. So thank you so much. If you have any questions for me, Jisoo, or Jessica, please feel free to add them to the Q&A.
I'd like to thank our presenters from the Office of Educational Technology. Great information you shared with us today. Everyone who participated in the call today, if you have additional questions or if you think of anything after this, please reach out to them directly or forward the questions to our office, and we'll make sure that they receive them. Before we conclude, are there any additional questions or comments from anyone in our audience today? If not, thank you for participating and enjoy the upcoming weekend. This concludes our call.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Everyone.